You know that saying that women are chatty and men are quiet?
Oh, yeah?
It's a stereotype we hear all the time.
Yeah.
But is there actually any truth to it?
Right.
That's what we're looking at today.
Okay.
In this deep dive, we're going to look at a research study.
Okay.
It's called Gender and Word Count, Unpacking Communication Patterns.
Interesting.
And the findings might surprise you.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued.
So
Yeah.
let's get right to it.
Okay.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
All right, so are you ready to dive into a question that never seems to go away?
Always up for a good conversation, especially one with as much debate as this one.
Exactly. We're tackling the age-old question, do women really talk more than men?
Ah, yes, the classic stereotype. We've all heard it. But is there any truth to it?
Well, luckily, a recent research study titled Gender and Word Count, Unpacking Communication Patterns might have some answers.
It really digs into some long-held assumptions about who really dominates conversations.
Yeah, this study is pretty fascinating because it's huge, over 2,000 participants.
Right. That's way more comprehensive than a lot of the previous research out there.
So it should give us a much deeper understanding of just how communication really works.
For sure.
So before we jump into all the details, let's set the stage. What's the big takeaway here? Does this study confirm or debunk the stereotype?
Well, the results are kind of surprising.
Oh, I love surprises. Lay it on me.
So the study did find that women, on average, they do use more words per day than men.
Okay, not a huge shock there.
But it's not as simple as just labeling women as the chattier sex.
I knew there had to be a but. So what's the catch?
Well, the difference in word count, it's not like a fixed thing. It actually changes throughout our lives.
Interesting. So age plays a role here.
Big time. It suggests that social roles also have a big impact on our communication patterns.
Okay, so walk me through this. How does word count change as we age?
All right, so let's start with adolescence.
Those teenage years?
Exactly. So during this phase, the difference is actually super small, almost negligible. Women in this age group are using about 513 more words per day than their male counterparts.
513 more?
Yeah, it's not much. It's almost like they're just warming up their vocal cords,
Aha, like a pre-game show before the main event of adult conversation.
Exactly. Then as we move into emerging adulthood, that gap widens quite a bit.
Emerging adulthood, what age are we talking here?
Late teens, early 20s, that sort of period.
Okay, got it. So what happens to the word count then?
So it jumps to a difference of around 841 words per day.
Wow, that's quite a leap.
Right. And think about this is when people are going through a lot of intense social development.
Yeah, true. They're navigating relationships, figuring out who they are, their place in the world.
Exactly. Maybe those extra words are being used to explore all these new ideas, test out different versions of themselves.
It's like they're processing all the emotional stuff that comes with being that age, right?
It could be. It's like those additional words aren't just random chatter. They're actually a tool for navigating all the complexity of early adulthood.
That makes a lot of sense. So then what happens as we enter early and middle adulthood?
Well, things get even more interesting.
I'm intrigued.
The gap reaches its peak during this stage.
Really? How big are we talking?
Women are using a whopping 3,275 more words per day than men.
3,275. Wow, that's a pretty dramatic difference.
It is. And it makes you think about what's happening during this phase of life.
Yeah, what could explain such a huge gap?
Well, think about the social roles that are often front and center at this point.
You mean careers, families, all that?
Exactly. Women are often juggling so much at this age. They're managing household, nurturing relationships, building careers.
It's a lot to handle.
It is. And all of these roles, they often require a lot of communication.
That's true. Coordinating schedules, keeping everyone on the same page.
Right. So maybe it's not that women are inherently more talkative. It's that their social roles just demand more verbal communication.
I see your point. It's like they're the CEOs of their own lives, constantly delegating and negotiating, making things happen through words.
Precisely. It highlights a crucial point. Communication isn't just about how much we talk, but also about the purpose of those words.
So true.
Women in these roles, they're often using language to achieve very specific goals.
Whether it's building consensus, fostering collaboration, or just, keeping everything running smoothly.
You nailed it.
So if we're talking about purpose, what about the men in this age group?
Good question. Are they communicating less or are they just communicating differently?
Right, because they're not exactly silent either.
Exactly. And this brings us to the concept of report talk.
Okay, I've heard of that. Fill me in.
It's a communication style that's often associated with men.
Uh-huh. And how is it different?
Well, we talked about report talk, right?
Yeah, prioritizing connection and relationships.
Right. Report talk is different. It's all about conveying information, efficiently being direct.
So less about feelings, more about getting things done.
Exactly. Like a verbal toolbox for problem solving and action.
I like that analogy.
Haha, good. So men in this age group, they're often focused on achieving goals, solving problems, establishing themselves in their careers.
Makes sense. Their communication is more about tasks and less about emotional expression.
You got it.
So it's like they're speaking a different dialect of communication.
That's a great way to put it. And understanding these different styles, it helps us move beyond those simplistic stereotypes.
It helps us appreciate the different ways people use language to navigate their world.
Exactly.
But hold on, this word count gap, it doesn't stay the same forever, right?
You're right. Things get pretty fascinating as we move into older adulthood.
Older adulthood? What happens then?
Well, the trend actually reverses.
What? You're kidding.
Nope. Older men, on average, they actually use 788 more words per day than older women.
No way. So the men who were all about brevity before suddenly become more talkative in their later years.
Yep. It's a pretty interesting twist.
What could explain that?
Well, there are a few theories floating around, but it's not totally clear yet.
Give me some of those theories. I'm dying to know.
Okay, well, one idea is that as men transition into retirement, their social roles change a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They might have more free time, leading them to join social activities or community groups.
So more opportunities to chat and connect.
That's the idea. It's not that men suddenly become chatterboxes. It's more about the social landscape shifting around them.
I see what you mean. So their environment creates more space for conversation.
Exactly. Another possibility is that traditional gender roles, maybe they loosen up a bit in later life.
So men feel more comfortable expressing themselves verbally?
Maybe. Perhaps they feel less pressured to be stoic or reserved, allows for a more free-flowing exchange of thoughts and feelings.
It's like they're finally allowed to break free from those societal expectations.
Precisely. And it highlights just how much social norms can impact our communication patterns.
It suggests that the way we interact, it's not fixed. It can adapt to changing circumstances.
You got it.
This is all so fascinating. It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion here, discovering more complexity with each new finding.
That's a great way to put it. And as we continue to explore this world of communication, we'll dig even deeper into all the factors at play.
We'll look at personality, individual differences, and of course the fascinating interplay of report talk and report talk.
It's going to be a fun ride.
I can't wait. So we were talking about how men become more talkative later in life.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how those patterns shift?
Yeah, totally. It makes me think about all the times I've just assumed someone was being chatty.
You mean without really considering what might be going on underneath?
Exactly. Like maybe their communication style serves a specific purpose.
We often jump to conclusions about people's communication, don't we?
It's so easy to do, like thinking a woman who talks a lot is just gossiping.
When actually she could be strategizing or trying to build consensus.
Or assuming a quiet man is disinterested when really he's just processing things internally.
It's a good reminder to approach communication with an open mind, right?
For sure. So before we got sidetracked, we were talking about how the word count gap changes over time.
Ah, yes, and how it actually reverses in later adulthood.
What other cool findings did the study uncover?
Okay, well, one thing that really stood out to me was the impact of context.
Context, you mean like where the conversation is taking place?
Exactly. The study found that the gender gap in word count, it's most obvious in social settings,
Okay, that makes sense.
but it actually shrinks a lot in professional environments.
So when people are at work focused on goals, the differences become less noticeable.
Exactly. It seems like when we're working towards a shared objective, we adapt our communication styles.
So it's not just about our gender, it's also about what we're trying to achieve.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense. So back to social settings where the gap is wider.
Yes, where we see those distinct communication styles really shining through.
That's where report talk and report talk come into play, right?
Absolutely. Social settings are like the perfect stage for observing these styles in action.
So remind me again about report talk.
It's all about building those connections, fostering empathy, creating that sense of shared understanding.
It's like the language of emotional connection, right?
You got it. It's like weaving a tapestry of shared experiences, using words to create intimacy and belonging.
I love that analogy. So poetic.
Thanks. And then on the flip side, we have report talk.
Which is more common among men.
Often, yes. It's all about conveying information, efficiently asserting expertise, problem solving.
So it's more practical, less focused on emotions.
Exactly. It's like the language of action and directness.
So instead of weaving tapestries, it's more like building bridges or constructing solutions.
Perfect. Of course, these are generalizations.
Right. Not every woman is a master of rapport talk, and not every man avoids emotions.
Exactly. But recognizing these general patterns, it can help us understand the motivations behind different communication approaches.
It's like a starting point for understanding why people communicate the way they do.
Exactly.
This is all so fascinating. It's like we're cracking the code of human interaction.
I know, right?
But is it really fair to generalize about communication styles based on gender?
That's a really important question. And you're right, individual personalities play a huge role.
Because some women are naturally more direct, right? And some men are great at building rapport.
Exactly. We can't put people in boxes. It's more about understanding these tendencies as a starting point.
So we can then look at the individual and see how their unique personality shapes their communication style.
Exactly. And that's why this study's focus on individual variation is so crucial.
Because they found word counts ranging from under 100 to over 120,000 words per day.
Right. That's a huge range.
It shows that personality and personal experiences also shape how we communicate.
For sure.
Speaking of factors that might affect communication, I've noticed that I tend to get more talkative when I'm stressed.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if the study looked at that.
They did, and guess what they found?
What's that?
Stress levels didn't actually seem to have a big impact on the difference in word count between men and women.
So both men and women kind of ramp up their communication volume under pressure?
That's exactly what they found. It seems like stress might act as a sort of equalizer.
It makes people prioritize clarity and efficiency regardless of gender.
So our communication styles are adaptable. They can shift based on the circumstances.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about age, social roles, context, even stress.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But what about the root causes of these gender differences? Why do women, on average, use more words per day than men?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And researchers have come up with a few possible explanations.
I'm all ears, lay 'em on me.
Okay, well, one theory that gets a lot of attention is the influence of social roles and expectations.
So basically how we're raised and the roles we're expected to fill in society.
Exactly. From a young age, girls are often encouraged to be expressive, nurturing, collaborative.
Yeah, they're often praised for their verbal skills and their ability to build relationships through conversation.
Exactly. And boys, on the other hand, are often socialized to be more action-oriented, competitive, independent.
So their communication is geared towards achieving goals, solving problems.
You got it.
It's like we're being trained for different communication games from the very beginning.
That's a great way to put it. And those early experiences can have a lasting impact on how we communicate as adults.
It makes you wonder if we even realize we're playing by those rules sometimes.
Right. It's like those patterns become so ingrained in our subconscious.
So social conditioning plays a big role for sure, but there must be more to it than that, right?
You're absolutely right. There are other factors at play, too.
Like what?
Well, some researchers believe that biological differences between men and women could also be contributing.
Biological differences? You mean like how our brains are wired?
Exactly. For example, studies have shown that women tend to have more active language centers in their brains.
So they're literally built for verbal fluency.
It's a possibility. But of course, we have to be careful about overemphasizing biological differences.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic. Reducing complex human behavior to biology can be really problematic.
You're absolutely right. We can't ignore the incredible complexity of brain structure and function.
And individual differences are always going to be more significant than any broad generalizations about gender.
Exactly.
So biological factors might play a role, but they're just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. It's a complex interplay of nature-nurture and everything in between.
Okay, so we've got social conditioning and biological factors. What else could be influencing these communication differences?
Well, another piece of the puzzle is cultural conditioning.
So the norms and expectations of the society we grew up in.
Exactly. Think about it. In some cultures, women are expected to be more deferential, less assertive in their communication.
And in other cultures, it might be the opposite.
Exactly. These cultural nuances can really affect how we perceive different communication styles.
What's considered polite or assertive in one culture might be seen as rude or aggressive in another.
Precisely. And being aware of these differences is so important for effective communication.
Especially in today's world where we're interacting with people from all sorts of backgrounds.
Exactly. We have to be willing to step outside of our own cultural bubbles.
It's like learning a whole new language of communication.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of different communication styles, I'm curious to see how these play out in specific contexts.
Oh, me too. Like, how do report talk and report talk manifest in the workplace or in romantic relationships?
Those are great questions. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore exactly that.
We'll uncover some fascinating insights about how men and women navigate these complex social landscapes.
It's going to be an eye-opening conversation.
I can't wait. You know, this whole conversation about communication styles, it's got me thinking about all the ways we communicate beyond just words.
Oh, absolutely. It's like there's this whole hidden language we're all speaking.
Right. Body language, tone of voice, even those little pauses and silences.
All of that stuff carries so much meaning.
It's making me rethink all the times I've totally misread a situation.
It happens to all of us. It's easy to misinterpret things if you're not paying attention to all the cues.
So how do we get better at decoding those subtle signals?
Well, it takes practice, for sure. But one thing that can really help is cultivating what we call mindful communication.
Okay, mindful communication, what does that involve?
Basically, it's about becoming more aware of both our own nonverbal cues and the cues of the people we're interacting with.
So paying attention to things like posture, eye contact, facial expressions.
Exactly. And also things like tone of voice, pace of speech.
It's like becoming a detective, looking for all those little clues that reveal what's really going on.
Exactly. And the more we practice this kind of mindful communication, the better we become at reading those signals.
And that helps us respond in ways that are more sensitive and appropriate.
You got it.
This makes me wonder about how men and women might use nonverbal communication differently.
Oh, that's a fascinating question. And you're right, there are some interesting gender-based tendencies.
What have researchers found?
Well, for example, studies suggest that women tend to be more attuned to nonverbal cues than men.
Really? So they're better at reading those subtle signals?
It seems so. They're often better at interpreting facial expressions, tone of voice, all of that.
So they're more likely to notice if someone's smile seems fake or if their voice doesn't match their words?
Exactly. And this might be linked to their preference for rapport talk.
Right, because rapport talk is all about emotional connection and empathy.
Exactly. If you're focused on building those bonds, you're naturally going to be more tuned in to those emotional signals.
That makes a lot of sense. So what about men?
Well, men with their tendency towards rapport talk, they might be more focused on the literal content of the message.
So the facts and figures, the bottom line.
Precisely. It's not that they're completely oblivious to nonverbal cues.
It's just that they might not place as much importance on them as women do.
Exactly. It's all about different communication priorities, different ways of processing information.
This is also eye-opening. It's like we're gaining a whole new understanding of how these communication patterns play out in real life.
And we're really just scratching the surface. There's so much more to learn about nonverbal communication.
Oh, I bet. Like how cultural differences affect body language and all of that.
Exactly. It's a vast and fascinating field to study.
So much to explore. It's a good reminder that communication is something we're constantly learning about and refining.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of gender and communication, what's your top piece of advice for our listeners?
That's a good question. I think my biggest piece of advice would be to cultivate a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness.
Curiosity and open-mindedness. I like that.
Be willing to challenge your assumptions. Step outside of your comfort zone.
Don't be afraid to explore different communication styles.
Exactly. You never know what you might learn about yourself and others.
That's such a great point. So to all our listeners out there, pay attention to those subtle cues, the body language, the tone of voice.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
And remember, communication is a two-way street. It's about listening as much as it's about speaking.
Well said.
It's about seeking understanding and being understood.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of gender and communication.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing. And remember, it's not just about the words we say.